You know, one of the most fun things about being a Jujutsu Kaisen fan is often comparing powers and abilities. There's just such a variety within the universe that you have to look at them and go, was this person stronger than this person, or was this ability more useful than this? I mean, the creativity used in Jujutsu Kaisen is honestly a big factor in why it's so popular. But as of late, within, the last few episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen, we got our look at the last of the disaster curses, Dagon. And the question becomes, was he the weakest one? But before we do that, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video so I can keep bringing you more anime content. I think the first thing that you have to look at is to whether Dagon was the weakest cursed spirit is all of his abilities. Because like many characters in Jujutsu Kaisen, much of the battles can be determined by what abilities they have at their disposal. Now in the case of Dagon, he is a disaster curse, so he's more an embodiment of a concept than he is anything else. And for him, he got a pretty good one with the ocean. So breaking it down, his first ability that we see, and the one that probably gets used the most, is his manipulation of water. Now, we see him use this the most, but we don't see anything overly creative with it, probably because he had just hatched from his cursed womb when he starts using it. But what we do see is he can flood an entire building with more water than Maki says Max Elephant can use, which is a big deal because obviously we saw Max Elephant can push somebody out of a hallway, out of a building. We know he can use it to form reflexively a shield. He can use it to essentially push people around. Now, whether he could have been able to make constructs out of it or use it more as a weapon for cutting and slashing things, we don't know. It is in the possibility that he could have, but we do know that he at least had a near infinite supply of it because he probably converted cursed energy into water, and then he could manipulate that cursed energy seemingly however he wanted. Now, his second aspect is not one that we get outside of his domain expansion, but I think he could use because of the way that it's demonstrated, and that is he could make Shikigami. In particular, he can make Shikigami based off of anything in the ocean. Now, given the large amount of species that are in the ocean, that gives him a pretty robust armory that he can utilize. Obviously, his most powerful ability then is when he triggers his domain expansion, Skanda of the Captivating Horizon, and he can trigger Death Swarm, which is where he makes an infinite amount of Shikigami that just overwhelm an opponent and consume them. That by far and away is his strongest ability, but combined with his other abilities, it really starts to add up to being dangerous. Obviously, the biggest one is when you're in domain expansion, you can't escape, therefore you're just getting constantly hit with killer fish. He does have a few other abilities. We don't see any martial arts from him, probably because of, again, he just hatched, but he can seem to at least float or hover. Not strictly speaking fly, we don't see him fly, but he can escape combat if only briefly. And that pretty much rounds out his abilities. He wasn't in the manga as a full-time character that long, but from what we see, he was very powerful. Now, in order to scale what else you probably need to take him down, let's look at who he had to fight. Now, the primary combatants for most of this are Maki, Naobito, and Nanami. Now, all of those are really great characters with really strong abilities, but I think as we can see over the course of the battle, Dagon was giving them trouble. It was extremely difficult for him to deal with them, but in turn, he started to take large chunks out of them, especially once he got his domain expansion up. I think the one who was giving him the most trouble was Naobito, because he was able to freeze him and then deal damage. We don't really see Nanami get a lot of direct hits in on him, and even when he did, they didn't do it as well in the anime. In the manga, you can clearly see Dagon just regenerating from getting hit with the ratio technique, and that's the problem. Unless you hit a truly crippling blow, then Dagon will just constantly reheal himself using his vast amounts of cursed energy. I think on the same experience, Megami comes in. Megami could have been an interesting addition to this, but mostly he's just there to make sure the others live. And keep in mind, his introduction was really at the fact that Naobito had lost an arm, Maki had gotten pretty beat up, and so had Nanami. I mean, it's not impossible they could have held out, but the field was definitely shifting more in Dagon's favor until Megami had arrived. And then lastly, obviously, we have Toji's arrival, and Toji is kind of like Sukuna or Gojo. He's just such an abnormality, it's hard to gauge him versus everyone else. That having been said, obviously, as we know, Dagon was not quite equipped to deal with the Sorcerer Killer. In regards to that, then, you might say, well, Dagon is obviously the weakest because it took Gojo to kill Hanami, and all of the other cursed spirits will be dealt with in time by very specific people. And, it is kind of funny that no disaster curse has ever been taken care of by somebody who wasn't special grade, and that is true. But fundamentally, I think it would be unfair to just categorize that depending on who took them out or who was on the lead up to taking them out, somebody is the strongest or not. Because there is a ranking for these characters, and I think explaining it could help. Now, truth be told, I think if we were going to put who is the strongest of the disaster curses, it's a bit of a toss-up. I think it's probably Mahito. Mahito has the most robust ability of all the disaster curses, and he's by far and away the most dangerous. Now, he ironically is also the one who never really got paired off against any, like, even high grade 1 or special grade sorcerers for most of his tenure. So because of that, it does make it a bit more difficult to scale him versus other characters. So is he actually stronger, or did he just get extremely lucky in his fights? Difficult to say. I would definitely say Jogo is extremely powerful because of obviously who kills him. And I think that because of that, just he's not as utility based, but the ability to summon an asteroid cannot be underestimated. So I do think he is second, which then leads me to third, and I think Dagon is third. Again, he might be swappable with Jogo, depending if he had lived longer and we got to see more of his abilities and he'd learned more. But unfortunately, he didn't, and therefore I think he's third. Because let's be honest, he was struggling with Free, but he was going to overwhelm those Free. Eventually, had Megami not arrived, they more than likely would have died within his domain expansion. So I think that really does put him at third, which leaves Hanami as last. Hanami had multiple square-off battles with both special grade and non-special grade sorcerers, and their inability to deal with any of those encounters, I mean, let's be honest, there's a possibility that Todo and Yuji might have been able to exercise Hanami. That's not an impossibility. And then Gojo almost killed Hanami and then did kill Hanami. So I think Hanami has to be ranked at the back. Plus, of all of them, Gege has admitted that Hanami was the only one that he never developed any kind of domain expansion for, suggesting that Hanami was not supposed to be that important. So I think all of that together shows that Dagon was not the weakest cursed spirit. It might have very well been one of the strongest. But unfortunately for him, he encountered somebody that's just that much better.